he had to be here. Thanks for coming and doing this. Thanks for taking the time. I hope this is really interesting for everybody. This is kind of like the first kind. We've done events before, but this is the first of this kind that we've ever done. So we're hoping it will be like really good, and hopefully we'll do more. What we'll do is we'll just go through like each speaker. We'll do Dan first, and then we'll do Naman, and then we'll do Jeremy. Each of them should only take about 5-ish minutes. They're going to go all of one after each other. I'll do a little intro before each person, and then we'll do like 2-minute comfort break in case you guys need to like get up and like go to the loo or like get a drink or whatever, and then we'll just come straight back and go in for questions. I would say just like use the Zoom emoji thing to raise your hand for a question. If you don't want to say your question out loud, that's cool. Just stick it in the chat and I'll try and get to it. We are recording this. If you like don't want to like, we're recording this for the people who aren't here so that they can like watch it back afterwards, and we might put it on YouTube. But if you don't want to appear in the recording for whatever reason, that's cool. Just like pop me a message in the chat and I'll make sure you don't appear in the video. I think that's it. Should we get started? Is everyone cool? All right.
Sounds great, Georgia.
God, yeah, there we go. Cool, thanks. All right, we'll start with Daniel Huggins. He is the co-founder of Text Alchemy. And he's been prompt engineering since the release of InstructGPT. He works in the professional coaching industry, and he and his team are developing their own prompt chain engineering toolkit called Retort.js. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Daniel, when you're ready, get started. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Sure, I'm Daniel Huggins, as the lovely Georgia introduced. And I'd like to talk to you today a bit about function calling and some of the things, GPT function calling, and some of the things that enables for AI agents. It enables something I like to call workflow agents. Agents which are a bit more locked down, a bit more reliable, a bit more structured than the kind of loosey-goosey ChatGPT stuff we're used to, where it can do anything and everything, but nothing reliably. So I'm going to first by introducing you to function calling. I'm sure a lot of you already know what that is, but not everyone. So I'm going to do a basic introduction. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to work with ChatGPT. And I'm going to ask it, create an image for me, a duck with goggles. And so it's going to churn away and churn away and churn away. And because this is a live talk, it's probably going to take like 5 minutes and waste all my time. But give it a sec. So what's happening here is that, the AI has gone to this external service and said, okay, I want you to create an image for me. And you can ask ChatGPT how it actually did that. So, okay, so show me the JSON you used to call that function. And what it did was it sent a message to this external service called text to image, and it sent the text, create a whimsical scene of a duck wearing goggles sitting by a lake, and do that at this size. And what that means is, okay, so what's happening here is that ChatGPT is essentially filling out a form. And in fact, what you can do is you can tell ChatGPT, I want you to fill out this form and send it off in exactly this format. So this is the format, and it's like a prompt is a string, and give me a detailed description, give me an exact size, give me a number of images to generate, and give me reference images to compare to. So GPT a few months ago introduced this feature, which is fill out a form in this format. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to create agents and AI analyses which follow a very strict format and protocol, and where you can interact with the AI agent directly through code. So I'm going to show you an example of that now. Very, very simple example. So this is a very simple customer purchasing agent. You're a customer service bot for a t-shirt wholesaler. Can you guys see this and what I'm looking at? Your customer service bot for a t-shirt wholesaler. You sell shirts in various sizes. You can sell shirts in small, medium, and large, and you can also take inquiries. And you can talk to this bot, and it goes, okay, ask for a user input. And it says, I would like to buy one large shirt, please. Okay. And what we're going to do next is we're going to ask it for an analysis. Has the user asked to buy shirts? That's a Boolean question. How many shirts have they asked for? That's a number. And what size have they requested? And that can be small, medium, and large. And what we can do at this stage is that rather than just like doing a loosey-goosey thing, we can take the user through a workflow. In this case, the workflow is very simple. It is, you have asked to buy this many shirts. Is that correct? Please confirm. I confirm yes. Great, your order has been placed. And so we do, and to confirm the order, we do an analysis. We say, ask the AI bot, has the user confirmed? And then we do the confirmation workflow. And if that didn't work, we can handle the inquiry conventionally using a user generation. So we can go, okay, do you ship to Canada? Yeah, we do ship to Canada. So it allows you to split and fork the agents into various different structured workflows. And this ability to ask the AI to fill out a form can also be used in areas like testing. You can say, okay, did this agent, did this conversation perform according to these specifications? You can even use it to tie down the bots by testing everything the bot said against like a company provided spec. So you get a spec and say, okay, the agent needs to be polite. It needs to remind the user about this or that. And you can double check everything the agent says against the specification to make sure that it's doing its job. And yeah, so that concludes my talk about the power of function calling and how you can use it to make structured workflows, which are much more which follow a specification rather than the loosey-goosey stuff we have so far. If you're more interested, I can post a link to an online playground where you can try the stuff out. Don't have the analysis stuff fully working on the playground yet, so that's that. But I'll post a link now, and then I'll hand off to the next speaker. Oh, and questions as well.
Great, thanks, Dan. Yeah, let's move on to the next speaker. If you have any questions about this, just try and hold them in your mind, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. Now we're going to do Naman. Naman is one of the founding engineers at MultiOn. So he's working with a particular focus on AI agent development, backend infrastructure, and mobile application development. And yeah, we're really excited to have him here and talk about, his experience at MultiOn. Take it away, Naman.
Yeah. So I had some slides to share where, yeah, let me show you if I can share my screen. So yeah, so at MultiOn, what we are trying to do is another kind of agents which is sort of can work autonomously. So our agent is something that what we think of agents is something that's the new interface to the digital world. So at MultiOn, what we have done is how our technology works is that we can take language to action, where we are able to take in users' own normal query and basically make the agent work fully autonomously to achieve one task. And in this video, I'm not sure if it will just take the whole time, but we can see a brief example of our giving a normal query to our agent, and there it basically performing a task of booking a site fully autonomously without any human intervention. Again, fast forward it a bit. So here you can see it's selecting the flights, selecting the correct dates. And yeah, so here it's select the flight, and then it will finally go to United website. And from there, it will then fill out all the other information and in the end, complete the whole booking. So here is selecting the seats. Yeah, I'm just gonna skip to the end and show you how it's actually able to perform the whole purchase at the end. So this is the type of thing that we are building. Yeah, so this is the type of things we're building. where we consider that how you can do the task fully autonomously without doing having any interaction from like normal humans. Here, what we think is LLMs are the present, something that you can interact with currently, which, like as Dan mentioned, are loosey-goosey. They cannot do things correctly, or they can only you can only ask them things to be in a text form. Whereas agents are something of the future, which like people will be using in the next 5 years. Then the question comes on how we can make the agents more safer. If they have like they are safe and secure, how do we make sure that they don't perform actions that are random or doesn't help the user, like empty their bank accounts or do purchases that they don't want. So that's what we are trying to do, is to make sure like we are building a safe and secure agents that makes you more productive and also helps humanity in terms of AI. That's what like the main use of AI is. So yeah, so here at MultiOn, we are building agents which are able to handle tasks autonomously and work for you. So this is like a small chart that we have on describing agent and its components. So agent can have a lot of components, and how our agent can basically behave is it needs to have one main thing is memory, be able to understand what short-term memory is, or basically this can be the chat history or session history that you have in ChatGPT, where it remembers what task you did currently. Whereas it can also, one main thing that it needs is long-term memory, where it can understand what are the things that it did previously. Let's say it booked a flight 1 month ago, then you want to agent to be remember what it did there, what are your preferences, and so it can be other things, or like let's say remembering of preferences on terms of ordering food. Are you allergic to something, or do you want something else? There, if you, that's why like long-term memory is something that you really need. Otherwise, if you keep keep telling the agent what to do every time, then it's no longer useful. Another main thing is you need to actually be having ability to have complex and critical planning. So where it can basically create a whole step, the ability to self-correct itself, and also have way to know what of the subtasks are, and be able to ability to decompose user's query. So let's say if you want to book a trip to Italy, then you want it to be able to have the ability to know what are the different steps to doing it. If you want to able to know which flights to book, which if you want to take a Uber to the hotel, then know which Uber, and then also be able to select the correct hotel rooms for you and the rest of the sites. Similarly, it also needs to have tools for like calendar, calculator, core interpreter, which are more complex tasks or search. And then finally, it can take action. So, and another thing that we think of our agent is in terms of autonomy. We can describe it in L0 to L5 in terms of self-driving cars, where anything below to L2 is comes under human control, where human is controlling the machine and machine doesn't work autonomously. Whereas after L3, machine is doing all the action. So we can consider L5 where the machine is fully autonomous, is taking all the decisions and what to do. So similar to Waymo on how it can go from one place to another fully autonomously without any human intervention. Whereas L4 is something like Tesla, where it can do most of the tasks, but human is there to overtake or as a fallback where if something goes wrong. What we think of our agent is something between L4 and L5, where it's able to do most of the tasks autonomously and only need to engage with the user if it requires any confirmation of payment or it needs more information that it didn't already have. So that's what we are trying to build, where agents are something that work fully autonomously without doing anything. So we have like several interfaces to interact with our current agent. So one is a mobile app, which we are not launched yet, but is something we are planning. And I'm going to skip this. This is another video of our agent taking action. So I can skip this one. Yeah, we also did one thing where the agent was actually able to take the DMB test and pass it fully. And yeah, this was the success result where we also were able to get the California driving license for the agent, but we removed some of the you don't see it. And yeah, this is another platform that we have. It's like that's just currently live. It's called Playground, where you can actually directly interact with our agent today. I can also post a link later. Yeah. So this was the most of the talks I've had about having an agent that can do the actions for you and something that's more reliable than just having a ability to chat with you. And we also have another thing called Agent API, where developers can actually use our agent and interact with. Developers can take our agent and sort of use it as a global API to achieve any task on web and get the results back. Okay. And yeah, this was all. We're also hiring, so if anyone's interested. Okay, thank you for listening to me.
Thanks so much for that. That was awesome. Yeah, okay, we're moving on now. We're going to go to Jeremy. Jeremy is our very own founder of Handshake. He also describes himself as a venture builder and a strategist who has been working with clients to understand, plan, and implement generative AI projects since 2019. So with Handshake, he works with a team to build custom generative AI models for other companies and conducts strategic research and trains organizations all over the world with generative AI. Take it away, Jeremy.
Thanks, Georgia. And thanks, Naman and Daniel. And obviously, very constrained talks at the beginning here. We're going to send out these slides so that people can watch the videos and links to both MultiOn and Retort and Text Alchemy so people can go and try those services themselves. Handshake is downstream of both of these companies. We work actually with both of these services in order to help serve our clients. And we've had some really interesting results with both. We help businesses integrate generative AI. So we're not in the business of training models. We're in the business of actually like implementing these. And in the last few months, that's been retrieval augmented chatbots that people are using internally and externally. So this can take the form of helping a leadership development organization or a think tank take their IP and bring it to life so that people get always on coaching and aren't limited to just when they're talking with the trainers. This can take the form of something like askgive.org, which is a chatbot that helps answer questions about philanthropy and giving. That we're launching with give.org next week. But what's been true up until now and what's starting to change is that these are all constrained to a chatbot format. And on the background, we're using like lightly agentic properties, like we're including function calling. We're trying to give the LLMs as much as they can, some ability to plan or guess what kind of data they should pull at what points. But up till now, a lot of it's been pretty hard coded, and that's starting to shift because of services like what Dan and Naman are building. And this is important for businesses in a few different ways. One, because right now everyone is trying to build stuff and like figure out what infrastructure they're going to have in order to support generative AI applications internally and for clients. And a lot of it is set up to assume that the AI needs to have the decisions made for it, that you have to tell it to do this and do this and do this, and you just constrain it and have it generate the text at each step of the way. This is kind of like what you get in an RPA like UiPath or Zapier. And that is slowly going away. So there's going to be all this technical debt that people are trying to deal with. And also because business strategists and planners, we work a lot, in addition to our software work, we work a lot at kind of like the board or strategic level in companies to help them plan 1 to 3 years out around generative AI. And everyone is really anchored today on what they see in today's AI, where AI is in a chatbot interface, it's in a thread, and they're not thinking about how it works when something like MultiOn exists, and it's actually able to move around from software to software in and outside of the browser, when it can actually interact with different things and do it dynamically, and how to do that safely and how that influences what they need to be doing in terms of training. and what they need to be doing in terms of hiring and what they need to be doing in terms of skill set. Even AI experts like, well, I'm not an AI expert. I don't think anyone's an AI expert, but even AI enthusiasts like myself, you know, I think there's going to be a huge learning curve and a huge realization moment, because prompting is super different for agents than it is for chatbots. You know, you need to be thinking when you're prompting in terms of like structure and flow much differently. The kinds of prompts that work for prompting ChatGPT to get things like the incredible duck that Dan was showing us are much different than when you're trying to get it to execute, you know, 10 or 100 or 1,000 steps in a sequence, and do that in such a way that at the end you're getting everything that you need. And so right now we're building some experiments around trying to understand what those affordances are and what's good and what's bad. You know, when GPT-3 came out and GPT-2 and we started working with this, it really was something that we'd never seen before, in that there's not a single science fiction writer, futurist, thinker, historian, doesn't matter, that I've been able to find anywhere that ever told a story, fictional or otherwise, in which super powerful AI was really, really good at poetry and bad at math. And because of this, we don't have any like even stories or myths that help us guide like how to think about these technologies. And I think that's going to happen. That's happening again with agents already, where like what they're good at, and what they're bad at is quite unexpected. And that learning curve is going to happen again in the next few years as these get good. Naman said in the next 5 years. I personally am more optimistic. And I think that, or I don't know about optimistic. I think the timeline is going to be much shorter. I'm already starting to integrate these kind of agentic systems in my workflow, and I think that they'll be really, really good and reliable in 6 months.
Great. Is that the end, Jeremy?
That's the end. Yeah, and Georgia, before you ask us some questions, I'd love to hear you introduce yourself as well, if you don't mind.
You want me to introduce myself? Oh, okay. I'm okay, cool. Yeah, my name's Georgia. I work in, I guess, tech policy stuff, and I also work with Handshake to do run events like this and like do like content production. Yeah, I don't know. I've been like reading and writing about AI for the last sort of 3 years, but more from a kind of, I guess, tech policy angle. So like more on the regulation side of things, but also I think, you know, it's important to like understand the actual technical limitations and capabilities of like AI models and other aspects if you're going to, you know, be thinking about how to regulate and how to create legislation around it. Yeah, that's me. Got me on the spot there, Jeremy. Jeez. Cool. I think it's been less than half an hour, so I think having a comfort break is a little bit much. So yeah, let's take it away with questions. If you want to raise your hand using the emoji thing, go ahead. Or if you want to put a question in the chat, I'll read it out for you. But please don't be shy. Let's ask away. If no one has a question, I can maybe kick things off with a question. Now, I think I had a question for you actually. I was writing stuff down while you were talking. I think I wrote it down here. Oh yeah, I was interested in like sort of, I feel like there's a lot of like when you were like explaining while you were like showing the chart of like what like how the agent is like taking inputs and then it's planning and then it's doing action. It kind of made me think of like can you, for lack of a better term, program, or are there like plans for this kind of thing? Program in like a long program of activities for it, including like telling it to ping you in like 2 months to make sure you're still doing your diet plan or whatever. Like, could you like do that on like do you know what I mean? Is there like, because I feel like there's the element of like, I need to do this one thing. I need to plan my holiday, or I need to plan a party. But what if you were like want to like plan a year of activities? Do you think that's like feasible?
Yeah, so I think there are like multiple ways to think about it. So one is planning. So planning is like it's able to understand all the things that it needs to do. So so that's where like you can interact with different components. So what you talk about scheduling things in next year or like in 2 months, there you can actually use the tools that we have. So basically, agent can create a whole plan on what you want to do. So let's say scheduling the whole thing or planning the event, and then actually have a tool to do those tasks for you. And so when you want to actually able to achieve it, it can actually already be there on your calendar. It had already created those things. And then it can have some sort of basically programmatical type of way where it can then go and do that task at that particular time. So it's basically where how you can, it can think critically about what the task you are trying to do, understand each and every subtask or sub steps that it needs to do, and then basically plan and do those things. And then you can actually see the results later on. If you want to schedule it, or you just want to have an ability to take complex things and then do it in front of you.
Yeah, cool. Okay, we've got a question from Toby Green. What's the state of open source agent frameworks? Whoever is the speaker, whoever wants to take this, go for it. You can all have your own, you can all do your own version of an answer.
Well, in my investigations, I find it very, very fragmented. There are a lot of frameworks. I haven't really found any of them to be like dominant or solidified yet. There's just a lot of small players playing in the background. Would be my analysis.
Yeah, that matches what I'm seeing, Dan. And I mean, there's lots of different attempts at this. I think that something that is the same across all of them is that they like don't really work. And I love open source, and I'm very generous with things, and I'm an artist in my life too, and so if things work enough for me to do weird art with them, that's enough for me. And the open source agent stuff is all very interesting, but hasn't quite crossed that threshold of being like something that like works enough to really, even with work and muscle, get it to do something. And I think in the case of agents, like the goal is that if you want an agent that if you run it for 3 minutes, it improves over that 3 minutes. And so if you ran it for 5 minutes, it would be better than if you did it for 3 minutes. So this is how it is with people, right? If I give you 30 seconds to write something, and then I give you a day to write something, I expect that thing that you took a day to do is going to be better than that thing that you took 30 seconds to do. And right now with chatbots, that isn't the case. If I ask it to write an essay, it takes 30 seconds. And if I ask it to rewrite it, it takes 30 seconds again. So this quality of being able to like, you could say monotonically or like more than zero improve over time is something that exists only with some of the closed source agents right now, allegedly, like what we're seeing from like Adept and Imbue, and the ones that we can actually see out in the wild, like MultiOn. But I think that the open source stuff is worth playing with, as far back as like AutoGPT. You get kind of the sense of like, oh, okay, there's like planning involved, there's memory involved, there's like function calling involved. So the components are there. What's not there is it like actually getting the thing done, except with a few like MultiOn or the on Rails ones like Retort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it makes sense. Also, one thing I would say is like one problem with agent is even with the open source, like the LLM model itself, it doesn't have like that much capability of running the things fully well. Whereas like with like better models, it can actually improve the capability of even current open source agents, where what you want to build is something which has better infrastructure and is able to handle those tasks. And then like the main thing about agent is how do you do those tasks reliably and make sure that users are getting the best and secure answer or like result that they wanted to ask for.
Great. We're going to move on to a question from Lauren now. She said that she heard an influencer saying that building AI chatbots for businesses was so 2023. So does that mean that agents are 2024 or what's next?
I can answer that one. I mean, yes, it was so 2023, but it's also going to be 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027, 28, 28, 9. Like just the classic chatbot that you have with ChatGPT, like what percentage of businesses have fully implemented those into their workflows and grasped all of the value therein? a tiny fraction. Like, we're talking about things which are kind of a step up from chatbots, but the fact is that very few businesses have harnessed the power of chatbots to begin with. Like, only the very most tech-enabled businesses, like, and a lot of businesses have security hurdles which they just haven't got over yet. Like, they're scared of ChatGPT, they're scared of all these things. So yeah, I think we're just chatbots. There's still going to be businesses that are starting to implement chatbots into their workflows in a decade. Like,
I would also say, sorry, I know I'm not like one of the speakers here, but I do want to add that like I think there has been like a common rush among many consumer facing companies to put chatbots into their like website interfaces to try and like have a cheap way of being helpful to customers. But then like, because they're all, I think it's like a competition thing, they're all competing to do the same thing. I think they've done it in like a sloppy way. And then you get like, I don't know what happened recently. Was it Canada Airlines like got sued because they gave like someone in, like they misinformed a customer about the bereavement policy, and like they tried to, they like doubled down by saying that like, oh yeah, our chatbot doesn't really represent us, so and it just kind of didn't really hold up in court. It was quite hilarious. Anyway, that's what.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's lots of examples like that that make people rightly hesitant to put stuff out. But I mean, I think that, you know, you could say like, oh, having a website, that's so 1995. Like, the reality is like, it in the 90s, early 2000s, it took a lot of like effort from a technical perspective for organizations to like maintain their website and email. Now it doesn't take much technical effort, but you still takes a lot of design. It's not about that you have a website, it's what's on the website. A chatbot is conversation. I've had conversations that have changed my life forever, and I've had conversations that were excruciatingly boring. So like I agree with what Dan's saying, that like, you know, as it's not about like having a chatbot right now. It's about like what's going into your chatbot, and that will get better and better, and the tools for doing that will get better and better. But chatbots are ultimately like a primitive that sits within agents. So like, for instance, the other day I was playing with MultiOn, and I wanted to send a poem to my friend because I like poetry a lot. And so I told MultiOn, I prompted in the browser, you know, find an article online about, my friend likes sustainability, find an article online about sustainability, take that article and then go into ChatGPT and use ChatGPT to write a poem about it. And then take that poem and email it to my friend. It actually stuck the landing on all of that. But like, so then the chatbot, the ChatGPT, just becomes something that the agent can also use. And so it's like chatbots, like even in cases where people are using agentic stuff that can go around and take actions, the chatbot lives within that, and how that chatbot communicates will be very important, and making that better will be very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, what I like to think is like chatbots and agents are something that you actually use to build things. So they're sort of like a building blocks that you actually go and make like a better frameworks or like a much more better product. So within even our MultiOn, agent is just like one of the products where you can actually integrate it in multiple things. Similar to iPhones and other things, like agent can be considered as a single app that you can then be able to interact with things, but iPhone and other things are like the whole structure where you are then actually playing around with it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Sorry, I've like scrolled up the chat a silly amount and now I've lost where I was. Okay, cool. So we've got a question from Kate. How do agents work in terms of giving people options within the steps? Because sometimes when planning, you are surprised by something. When looking, you weren't surprised by something when looking you weren't originally planning on. Sorry, wait, Kate, can you clarify? Do you mind clarifying what?
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry. I might have just
no, it's okay. I clearly need to chat GPT that question. So just in the, and you know, I'm new to agents, so maybe this is an ignorant question, but when, you know, it seems like the agent is planning and figuring out the next step and what should happen and doing it for you. And within those steps, is there a point where it has some flexibility to provide options to the person, like, should I go down this path or this other path? Or even introduce like something that might be unpredictable. I mean, I realize that this maybe is like asking it to be human, but I was just curious what kind of flexibility there was in agents, and maybe you lose the efficiency that way. I don't know.
Mhm. No, I think this is something like we are actually trying to figure out. So one thing is like if you are much more explicit about what you actually want the agent to do. So let's say if you are planning something, then you can actually give it more details on what you want it to do. Then it actually creates a plan that's more towards you, what you want to do. Another thing could be that agent learns from your preferences, where you give agent some steps, but it doesn't know some details. Then it tries to learn your preferences. So how Jeremy said, like have the agent be able to learn within 3 minutes, be able to make itself better. And that's where like this can be helpful. Where in the original planning, if it already knows things about you, your preferences, what you like to do, then it will make a plan that you want to do, and not something that you can be surprised by, or something you didn't want it to do or you plan it to do.
Yeah, when we're working on this, it comes a lot down to design principles, and these design principles aren't yet locked in yet. There's still a lot of open questions, but we can think about other kinds of software as a proxy for this. There's some softwares that are more for pro users. Let's think like Adobe softwares, where you have every kind of option. You can make every kind of change, even ones that are more like extensible than that, where you can even like open up the code and change it yourself. That kind of situation is very inappropriate for an everyday user. So then you get Canva, where I don't want you to ask me what type of yellow. I want you to tell me what kind of yellow. I don't know what kind of yellow to use, so you tell me. And so once you have, it depends on the kind of user, and these are design decisions that you can make. So when we're thinking about building an agentic system, if we want something where we're giving the user less options, we might think about using a framework that's more like what Text Alchemy is doing, where in the back end, we're being really didactic and very clear about what is supposed to happen under what conditions. If we want the user to be like, we want the agent to kind of return to the user and ask the user for input more often and do that in a dynamic way, we might consider something like MultiOn that has that flexibility and that ability to kind of like decide on its own, like when it has like almost a sense of when it doesn't know something. And even you can even kind of gauge up and down what that does. Another metaphor here for me is just with people, certain people that work for me or that I work for, certain clients want me to come back to them and ask them for input all the time. And certain clients want me to just go and do the work and come back. So it's also a bit of a preference thing. And it'll just depend on your use case and the users that you're designing for.
I think also like to add, maybe Naman will have something to say about this, but like I mean, surely if you're asking an agent to do something for you, like like do this, then do this, then do this, thanks. You can surely say at one point, but can you, when you get to this point, can you check whether I want it to be red or blue? And then like, because surely if you can ask it to do a bunch of things, you can also ask it to check with you, right?
Yeah.
It's still a chat interface, isn't it? Yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely ask it. So basically, what we like to think is like agents are pretty smart, what I've seen, where once you actually ask it to do a plan and ask it like in some of steps, okay, after doing this thing, check back with me, does it work for me? So in terms of it can be like, okay, once you go through all the things and you need a payment, then you actually check back with me, do I like this? Or if it selected something, then would you want it, ask it to actually confirm with you that these things are correct, or do you want to do something else? That's where it understands what you need, and you can always plan it out. For MultiOn, you can actually just give it in the single prompt, make it like a large step, and there it will understand what it needs to do and plan accordingly on what type of actions it's taking. And that's also generally helpful, where you have more control over what agent is doing. It knows, okay, I don't have the user's preference, that's why I want to do this. But ideally, once it like learns those things about you, you won't actually need it to do those things, and it already wouldn't understand, okay, at this point, like this, Georgia, she likes to check back with me on if this thing was correct or not, and then I will do the next step. So then the agent basically learns and do those things for you every time.
Right. Cool. We're going to try and move through these questions a little bit quicker because we are getting quite a few in. So Ryan has a question specifically for Dan. Is the primary value add of your approach the ability to confidently vet the AI's performance?
So that's half of the value add. Like, it is a lot about being sure about things, but it's also about being able to break down your AI into components. So one of the problems with AI is, like, if you're doing this agentic stuff, is you can put stuff into one prompt. And then the problem with AI prompting is that every part of the prompt affects every other part of the prompt, which means that you can make a small change in one area and it breaks something on the other side of your agent, on the other side of your app, which is a disaster from an engineering standpoint. So what this sort of analysis-based system does is you're able to take just one part of the agent, which does one function, and treat it completely separately from all the other parts, which is a vast advantage from an engineering standpoint. So it's not just about vetting, it's also about being able to modularize your agent system so that one part, introducing one feature into one area doesn't automatically threaten other parts of your agent.
Ryan, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate that. It makes me wonder, I guess, too, so do you lose like the spontaneity of AI that is part of the value that you would want when I don't know, maybe that's an ignorant question, but I'm wondering like how that gets balanced.
So that depends on this is an engineering tool, and it depends on how you structure the engineering tool. So one option is to just allow the AI agent to do anything, and just put put checks on it to make sure that it doesn't do certain things wrong. So that's one way to use the tool, is just to use the analysis function to just double check after everything it says that it hasn't crossed certain boundaries or thresholds, that it's followed certain processes correctly. That's one way to use the tool. Another way is to just use this sort of workflow system for specific functions and let it be freestyle the rest of the time. Or you can just lock it down, so it's just a very simple chat, like it's an agent that always follows certain pathways. Depends upon your use case.
Got it. That makes sense. Appreciate it.
Okay, moving on so Polly had a general question about if any of you can recommend any good tools you'd suggest for getting started with agents that are no-code tools. Jeremy, this might be one for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this so that Naman doesn't have to, but honestly, not just because Naman is here. Like, the best one to actually give you an understanding of what agents are gonna feel like is MultiOn. Like, there isn't any other agent out there that really gives you that feeling of you're in Chrome, you tell it to do something, and you watch it controlling your screen and doing it, and more and more, it sticks to the landing and actually does it. And so, and they have a no code feature. Of course, we don't know exactly what in a year or 3 years or 5 years, we don't know what the interface for agents will be and whether it's actually going to be in a browser like that, or how much of it will be like that and how much of it will be headless in the background. And MultiOn is obviously building for both, but I don't know of any no code tool besides that gives you like the full picture or the full glimpse of where this is going. There's lots of other more limited stuff, like, Zapier is like introducing some agentic experiments. I forget, it's not Canvas, it's a slightly different product, but Zapier is something, and we're going to see more and more of these kind of coming out. But I really suggest just getting hands-on with MultiOn. And then for coding stuff, there's a wide variety of options. Retort and Text Alchemy are included, of course, but Adept has some open source models and things like that. There's a bigger world to dive into. But yeah, Naman, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or Dan.
Yeah. So yeah, as Jeremy said, MultiOn is something you can just directly use. It's sort of like You get the familiarity of having a chatbot, but you actually see it taking actions for you. And there are also other tools where I'm not really sure on how you can use them. So Canva or those things, they are not fully agent, but you can use them without needing to use any code. But yeah, MultiOn is something like from start, you understand what it's trying to do and what actions it's taking. And most of the main idea of agent is basically not giving you ability to not use code and directly doing something and taking actions for you in general.
And anything to add?
No, I don't, not on the subject.
Polly, was that helpful?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Great, cool. Okay, Matty. So Matty is asking, how will the elimination of prompting and changes in design patterns impact the strategy development process for businesses in adapting to new market conditions? Quite a wordy question, but I think a good one.
Yeah, would you repeat it? Sorry.
So how will the elimination of prompting and changes in design patterns, how will those two things impact the strategy development process for businesses in adapting to new market conditions? And I guess, Matty, can you clarify what new market conditions you mean? I guess you mean the conditions created by generative AI, or I think, Jeremy, you understood.
Yeah, I think I've got I think I can answer part of this, and I'm going to tee up Dan to answer the other part, which is that prompting is gonna may fade into the background and change quite a bit, particularly for consumers. I mean, we've all noticed that if depending how long you've been tracking this stuff, you've noticed that models have gotten easier to prompt, in the sense of it's become less about knowing some secret pidgin or Creole that the model speaks, and more about just getting really good at clearly and explicitly outlining what you want. However, when something becomes more intuitive, that almost always means that someone has made decisions for you. And so it depends on whether you're a consumer or a creator of products, even as downstream as we are. If you are someone who wants to be creating and designing products for consumers and for users, and you're upstream of that, even if you're downstream of creating models or libraries or anything like that, prompting is going to be more and more important, because natural language is going to be a core part of how applications function, and natural language will be deeply integrated into software engineering. Because of that, how you prompt and when you prompt, particularly if you have chains of prompts, if you have complex systems in which many different prompts exist, where some of them are action prompts, some of them are retrieval prompts, some of them are generation prompts, some of them are user prompts. Being a prompt engineer is going to be a lot more than telling ChatGPT that you'll fire it if it doesn't, write your blog really well, and more about being able to conceive of flows of information and language, and think about, as a user input goes into a generation, being able to observe that at scale, using tools that allow you to actually interrogate and understand when something is different every time under the hood, or when it's exposed to a user, how that shifts in response to different behaviors. Ultimately, how that translates into analytics at the end. How, if you change a prompt that's under the hood, prompt number 3 in a chain of 10 prompts, how does that change, and user engagement shifts by 2 or 5%? How do you track that and understand those effects? So prompting is not only going to be more important for designers and creators, but it's going to be much more complex. There's a set of tools that are emerging now to solve the problem of the fact that people who are good at natural language and people that are good at software development are not always the same people. In the past, they often didn't have to be. And nowadays, you have things that affect the application that are natural language, agents and otherwise, that actually the product manager or the user themselves are more qualified and better to actually deal with and create than the engineers. So you need this middleware, because those people don't necessarily know how to use Git, or don't know how to embed into the code and properly work within it. And so there's a set of tools that are helping these teams of engineers and non-engineers collaborate consistently on software, and have kind of these hybrid GitHub type things where you can collaborate with technical and non-technical users in the same place. And I'll tee up Dan because this is actually not the agentic part, but it's like a sub part of what you're building and kind of like the builder tool side.
Yeah, but could we go back to the original question? Because I didn't quite, like, I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand how we got here. Like, could we go back to, like, what is the question I'm going to be answering right now? Because I don't quite get that.
So the question is, Matty, are you available to say it, to clarify it out loud, or do you want me to just read that out again? It's cool if I can read it out again, but maybe he's left, or I don't know. Okay, I'll just read it out again. I'll try and be extra clear. So how will the elimination of, wait, sorry, is that what we're on? Yeah, how will the elimination of prompting and changes in design patterns impact the strategy development process for businesses in adapting to new market conditions? That is his question.
Yeah, I don't get that second part of the question. Like,
Jeremy, what are you teeing up for Dan? Like, maybe the question doesn't matter.
So the question starts with, as prompting is eliminated. And so I was actually saying prompting will not be eliminated for designers. That like prompting might be eliminated for end users. It's going to be less and less the user's job. You know, I saw, I think it was Ryan or someone in the chat saying like, right now there's this kind of like, almost like AI gaslighting where it's like, oh, I wasn't able to get ChatGPT to do something. It's like, oh, you must not be prompting wrong. It must be your fault. Like that's not an appropriate way to treat users, right? And like no one wants that. And so it's like more and more people will find out how to eliminate that step for users. That's not the case for people building experiences for users. For people building experiences for users, prompting is going to be more and more important. So I'm actually disagreeing with like the premise of the first part of that person's question. Yeah. And then they're asking about design patterns and how that will shift in terms of businesses. And for most businesses that create something for users, that means that they'll have to like collaborate differently. And prompting will be a part of that, which is like actually, so then that's why I was leading to you, Dan, because you're actually building something that relates to that. So, which I think answers the person's question, although from a different premise.
Okay. So basically, like, so the question is that how is designing these AI things going to change in the future? And basically, I think the bottom line is it's going to become unbelievably, incredibly complex. So up until now, there are large software projects where there's millions of moving parts, thousands of developers working on them. Huge amounts of complexity involved in these projects. What we're going to see with agents is that complexity going to an entirely new level, where they have all of these moving parts with these super complicated agents, but the agents themselves can act in incredibly complicated ways themselves and do complicated actions, like the birth of true AI. And so what that's going to mean is that there's going to become software projects of completely unprecedented complexity and scale, and there's going to have to be an entirely new classes of tools relying on AI to make those projects happen. So I'd say the future in that direction is unbelievable complexity and the challenges of managing unbelievable complexity. It seems to have gone, but does that answer your question?
I think it's still good to answer, even though someone's gone, because I think it's interesting for the group. Cool. We'll move on now to, so Ryan, I see you have another question, but you've already had one. So what we'll do is we'll move on to somebody else and then we'll come back to you if we have time, if that's okay. So Imela is asking, is the solution more about the idea of multi-agent collaboration like ChatDev versus the idea of this semi-autonomous single agent like Devin?
Is there a way, what I was talking about in terms of solution here? So I think in terms of multi-agent collaboration, I think the idea is like you are actually able to interact with like multiple agents running autonomously and doing tasks. So there can be multiple ways on going about it. One thing that we consider is having like thousands of agents running and doing tasks for you, and have a way to have one single master agent in general that actually interacts and understands what's happening there, and then able to basically give you the result. But that actually depends on if the task is like more complex, or is just a single task that one single autonomous agent can easily go and do. So I think there it comes under how complex the task is and what you want to achieve there.
Great, thanks.
Cool. Does anyone have anything else to add before I move on?
Just to say that, like, we're still figuring out, one, there's a lot of definitions of agents, and this is like, it gets a little confusing because when we say agent, we can be talking about a custom GPT or ChatGPT itself, or these things that are able to move around between different softwares. And there is, at this point, rigorous research-backed evidence that under certain conditions, what we would call like multi-agent collaboration, having even just something as simple as taking ChatGPT and assigning it different roles and having those roles interact can, under certain conditions, produce better effects. There was like a paper that won an award at NeurIPS recently for Mindstorms, where they were having like groups of like 50 or 100 agents collaborate on tasks and recording that they were able to perform the task more effectively when working in those kind of coordinated groups. But the trade-off, as Dan was saying, is complexity, right? Where it's like, okay, so you get 10 of them working together, and then it performs your task 20% better. And then when something goes wrong, the task of figuring out, was it one of the agents? Was it all the agents? Was it how they're working together? Was it the thing I told them to do? Was it the thing they decided to do? Is just like a nightmare. And so the ability to like engineer it is like a big question mark that I think is just going to like take maybe decades to figure out fully.
Great. Oh, my cat is, get off my keyboard, buddy. Okay, great. So I think we can move on to, so Perry's got a question here, which I think has been sort of partially answered by Dan and maybe Jeremy, but I think it'd be good to dig in more to this. So he is asking, do you see the future as having lots of agents that are good for single purpose functions that are each called in turn by a quote unquote master agent, similar to a mixture of experts model? Or do you think the norm will be bulkier agents, like single agents that have a broad / varied functionality? What do we think?
I have an answer. Yes. It will be both. There will be lots of these. There won't be a dominant, like huge. There will be huge agents for multi-purposes, and there'll be very specific agents produced by a particular company to be created a particular task. Like they'll both exist. It's not, the market isn't going to go one way or the other. It's going to be a balance of the two.
Cool. Naman, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I sort of answered this question in my previous answer, where there can again be a purchase where you have like a sort of a master agent, as mentioned, which can consider with like lower level worker agents in a sense, where like these worker agents, as you can consider, they are experts in their specific tasks that they do, and then the master agent can control or like be able to communicate with different agents that are working and doing the task, and understand which task has been completed and what to do. So in terms of, again, can be described in terms of complexity on how the complex task is, that how many more agents that you need to spin up to achieve it. And comparatively, if it's just a normal task, then you can just have one single worker agent go and do the task and get you the result. So that's what like I think what agents can be. So instead of having like an agent that can do everything, you probably need like agent which can do particular task pretty well, and then sort of give you the result.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, we're going to move on to Christine, I think you asked a couple of questions, but I think one of them was like solved within the chat. And then the other one is, I mean, I think this is quite an interesting question, like how how long do you think it will be before the many prejudices that seem to be in AI tools will fade away? By that, do you mean that like bias in, do you mean model bias, or do you mean the prejudices that humans have about the way they work?
I mean a model bias, where you end up getting an answer which is influenced by racial prejudices or social prejudices, I guess.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything?
I do have some ideas on that, but Christine, I'd be curious to hear from you. I mean, you are, you've been, as someone who thinks a lot about technology systems and technology innovation, of which AI is like a subset. Like, what would be your guess on that?
Well, as we had a little conversation there in the chat with people saying this is never going to go away. And clearly, I think that's an option. But I would hope at least some of it would go away. And I guess I've been using the image generation programs more than general chat GPT. And I never cease to be amazed at how unrealistic my responses are. For example, I was looking for a book club discussion group, and the first thing that came up was an image with all white women.
Right.
You know, that seems to me something that could be really fixed in the short term, but we don't seem to be making much progress on that.
I would say with everybody I've worked with in the civic AI space who are concerned about this is that the general consensus seems to be that like this is not an easy fix because it's a social problem, not a technical problem. If we're going to like train large generalist models on like masses and masses of data scraped from the internet, the fact of the matter is those biases will be in there, and I don't know like whether you like mitigate for them afterwards, like in the way that Gemini has, and you get like black Nazis or whatever the hell it was, or whether you just kind of like put in other guardrails and make it so that people can't prompt certain things. I don't know, but I think it's like if humans have these biases, the models will have the biases, in my opinion, but I don't know, maybe other people think differently.
Yeah.
Well, oh, go ahead.
I thought I'd also point out that, like, relative to your example, you said they created a book club where they were all white women, and that's unrealistic. And whether or not that's unrealistic or realistic is dependent entirely upon where you are in the world. If you're in the US, which is a very tends to be quite racially diverse, that's quite unrealistic. But if you went to Eastern Europe, where countries have minority populations under 1%, that's actually very realistic. That might be a very realistic representation of a book club. And if you were to go to Africa for a book club, you might not see a single white person there, and so it would be completely unrealistic representation. So what's biased or unbiased varies depending upon who's asking and the context. So it's very hard to make something unbiased, because what's biased or unbiased depends upon so many factors which the AI model just can't know about. And secondly, like who is the final person to define what's biased or unbiased in a particular situation?
I think my work that intersects with this is most strongly is I do some volunteer work with a group called AI and Faith. That's like a combination of kind of like computer science folks and faith leaders talking about the intersection of AI and religion. I'm not personally a person of faith, but I just find it to be like a fascinating place to discuss ethics and morality, because it's people who are experts or a kind of expert in ethics and morality, as opposed to technical people trying to talk about it and vice versa. And there's strengths and weaknesses to both, but over 80% of the world identifies with a religious faith, and that number is growing. And so for those folks who are perhaps a minority in the world of people creating AI systems, but are not a minority globally, what constitutes like a hallucination would be something like, if you're a Christian and you really believe in the Christian Bible, then a hallucination is something that doesn't ascribe to the Christian Bible. And if you're an Orthodox Hindu person, then ChatGPT is hallucinating when it doesn't like espouse the facts or values of the Hindu faith. And so there is like a limit to the amount of agreement that can exist here. But I think the question for me is, how do we accept that fact that there's subjectivity and many things are relative without excusing ourselves and not being like, oh, well, everything's relative, you know, the model's going to have biases, I can't fix that. How do we remain committed to things like safety and dare I say like making a positive, a good effect on the world, while recognizing that kind of relativism and like subjective diversity, I think is like kind of the question for me. And I have more of questions than answers there.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, and we could all record our own 6-hour TED Talks about these alone.
Yeah, we should probably do a separate webinar on this, actually. That'd be really interesting.
That'd be cool. Yeah, man, we could get some really good speakers on that. Okay, I'm going to go back to Ryan. You had a second question. I will get to that. And then Mela, you also had a second question, and I'll do that, and then we'll see where we are. So Ryan asks, any thoughts on how to frame a compelling case that your niche chatbot is useful or more useful than ChatGPT? To me, it seems like the argument is often that ChatGPT could be better at the thing if you were a better prompt engineer. Does that make sense? I might have read it really terribly.
That makes sense to me.
Cool. Naman?
Yeah. So I think here the thing is, it depends. So in terms of agents are something that are like more than ChatGPT. ChatGPT is something right now, as you mentioned, it can only do, let's say, text generation, or like even with better prompting, or what you're going to get back is better text or some like images that you ask it to do. Whereas like the use cases for like new chatbots, such as like agents, where agents are something that are actually taking actions for you or doing some tasks that ChatGPT is not able to work. So what I consider agents is something that can actually interact with the real world and take actions for you, or something that you can delegate tasks towards. So in the terms, like you can basically have two use cases where if you just want to ask something, you can ask ChatGPT. Whereas if you want to actually take actions, do something, then you want to use agent similar to MultiOn, which is like basically doing tasks autonomously, and which can make you more productive and help you in some use cases that you have. And there are also a lot of things, especially what we have seen is even with better, you can also improve like what actions MultiOn is doing with better prompt engineering. So prompt engineering is basically now is sort of like a skill that everyone would need to have to better communicate on what are type of things that you want to do, on how you want to achieve something. And I consider it like talking to sort of like your own agent or like your personal assistant. On the better you are at explaining things that you want the other assistant to do, the better it's going to deliver the results.
Yeah, continuing on that, like I think there's a difference. One, there's a difference between like what might be called action models and language models, even with multimodal. And you can produce pretty effective agents like that do a limited set of things with a limited amount of complexity using, you know, a language model in a scaffolding. You know, and that's what something like what Dan is building is great for. But then it caps out at a certain point because even the really gigantic language models like Claude and ChatGPT are bad at planning. You know, you say like, okay, list the steps you're going to take to do this task, and it lists the steps, but it's not very good at that. And when you take, you know, a task that requires like 10 steps, 100 steps, and most even simple things do require this. If you think about the number of individual steps it takes for you to find something in on a web page and put it into an Excel spreadsheet, for instance, finding the thing, highlighting the thing, going to the other tab, navigating the right thing, copying it in. You only need like a few % failure rate on that times 10 for that to become like a massive failure rate, even for relatively simple tasks. So you need like many nines of precision on that planning part in order to actually accomplish this. And at a certain point, you need models that are trained on actions, whether that's actions in the browser or fine-tuned on actions in the browser or actions in software, along with the imagery and the text. And Naman, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm going a little bit outside of my technical depth there. But that's my impression in terms of like some of the limits of using purely ChatGPT and purely language model based systems.
No, yeah, I think that does make sense. Especially like, yeah, it's basically, as I mentioned, it's basically different. Like, what we do is more of a, like agents can be considered as like a action model, whereas ChatGPT is more of a language model. And then it just depends on what you're trying to achieve, on what your main use case is and what you want to do there.
Yeah, I thought it'd be good to cap this off with a sort of a summary. So ChatGPT assistants, they can't do big tasks, like big complicated tasks. They're limited to simple tasks, and specific models can do bigger ones. ChatGPT can't be fine-tuned for specific tasks. You're limited to prompt engineering, and if prompt engineering isn't enough, you can't do that. You can't interact very easily with your local machine or with websites, or there's limits on what ChatGPT can do, the kind of actions that it can take, and it can't access data on your local machine or in your databases or anything like that. And I'm sure there's a fourth one. Can someone find a fourth thing that ChatGPT can't do?
I think, the primary thing ChatGPT can't do is go outside of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think we've reached our final question. Unless anyone else has any more questions, stick them in the chat now and we'll get to them. But yeah, finally we've got Imela asking, what are the orchestration tools or layers you find the most robust if you're only planning on using a few closed LLMs like Claude or ChatGPT versus using a bunch of open sourced and closed LLMs and SLMs?
Yeah. So I think Dan sort of basically going on like Dan's previous answer. The main thing is like LLMs like Claude or ChatGPT is they are pretty limited in terms of functionality or what's exposed to the user. You can only use them like straight up on how they were given to you. So one good thing about them is they're really powerful. They will give you really good results in terms of if you prompt it compared to other open source models. Their generations and things are much better. Whereas compared to open source models, it's like you have much more ability to control them. You can basically, if you want to have a specific use case where ChatGPT you cannot go off, do other things other than prompt engineering in Claude or ChatGPT. Whereas for open source models, there are a lot of things, especially around if you want to if you fine tune it according to your data cases or your use set, then it will perform much more better and it will be much more financially and based compared to compute, be really good at achieving the task that you want to do there. So in terms of orchestration layer, like tools like ChatGPT, Claude are really good in the starting point. Whereas if you actually want to do a thing or like create a really good framework, then you will actually have to go towards more open source, which you have more control on, where you can make it on, if you already have a large amount of data that you wanted to work on, then you can always be able to fine tune it and understand what you want to do there.
Yeah, there's lots of different layers here, and it depends on how complex what you're doing is. Ultimately, I would bring everything back to design and users. You always want to start with, in any kind of software, who are your users, what are you trying to accomplish, and then work backwards into the technology. I think this question is from Ian, and I know Ian from our trainings, and so I know that you're quite an accomplished work with GPTs and custom GPTs, especially, with a lot of success in your company. Or if it's not, Ian, apologies, but let it be known that people do. And these are a perfectly acceptable orchestration tool. You can do a lot of things with a custom GPT. It can do retrieval. It can bring in a Python interpreter. It can bring in all kinds of like functions as well. And it does a lot of things under the hood on its own. Is it a perfectly acceptable example of a simple agent, one in which you connect things to it and the language model is the one making decisions. Where this caps out is if, for instance, we're making something for a client, we need to be able to say why something went wrong if it does, or have more control. And so the fact that GPTs just work makes it unacceptable for us, because we can't interrogate it. Like, we can't figure out when something's not working, why it's not working, because it's closed down. If you have more complex things, you might think about, using something like Martian is an example of people that are trying to do this in an automatic way, where it kind of like automatically selects what model you're using. But I also think that, like, the point of this kind of discussion here is that these things are about to shift a lot. Like, all the things that I just mentioned are things that are pretty locked down, pretty limited, and are interacting in like a circumscribed kind of boundaried area. Whereas as soon as something enters the browser or enters your computer OS, you have things that are trying to make guesses about how to interact with any number of softwares in any number of ways, not just specific softwares that are delimited and circumscribed by like specific API calls and specific methods. So there's interesting things that look today, but from the perspective of agents in this conversation, mostly like try experimenting with MultiOn and the orchestration tools like Retort, and just like kind of expect this to shift a lot in the next 6 months.
Okay, I did miss a question from Hannah, and it looks like a really interesting one, so I'm going to go ahead and ask that. Hannah asks, do you have any thoughts about the unique privacy concerns surrounding AI agents and their use in healthcare settings? So she imagines a future where a future system that could adapt to the needs and constraints of someone who can't speak or doesn't have dexterity to type, to help them control their environment and help them navigate through the world. So what do we think of that? Anybody?
I just spoke, so, but the thing I'll just say over this overall is that this is a really important question with agents, much more important than with chatbots, because agents move around between softwares. And part of the purpose of, for instance, MultiOn being in the browser is that when I'm in the browser, I don't have to authenticate all my different softwares. I'm already signed in. And so this in some ways could increase privacy, because I don't have to tell the agent my password. I'm just signed into the browser and it doesn't need to know. But people are going to start giving your passwords and everything to these agents for convenience sake pretty quick here. And they're already doing that with the chatbots, but the mistakes that happen with this are going to be a lot bigger, because this touches other parts of the internet and the real world, whereas like the chatbots don't. So it's a critical question. It's an unsolved question. And I think we're going to see bigger, more public mistakes with agents with regards to this than we have with the chatbots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so especially for privacy, one good thing about, like as Jamie mentioned, MultiOn is it's basically working on things that you already have given it access to. So, and one thing that we try to make sure is we don't collect data that's outside what we need. So what we care about basically when we are doing anything is what things to do, or like what actions to take. So which element to click, where we want to type, and do not take any other information from the user. And it's like the main thing about creating agent is having much more secure workflow, where only the information that you provided being utilized, and there's no data collection happening other than what we need for our own model training to improve the agent and make it better. And in terms of that, privacy concerns has always been like one main point that we are trying to solve, where you can sort of have some sort of a secure vault or vault access where all your informations are stored there that you provided, and we do not get or any other information that we don't really need from you. And that way, everything is much more secure and used basically on what you want to agent to know.
Something I could add. Hi, everyone. My name is Lev. I'm the research director at Handshake and also an AI expert. In a past life, I was actually a medical social worker representing people with healthcare concerns and vulnerable populations. And I think it's gonna take agents to like really figure their game out before any compliance will sign off on allowing them to work with vulnerable populations, because in America especially, it is really hard to represent someone else, whether they're mentally ill or medically ill, and kind of like taking actions on somebody else's behalf. You would need to like be extremely have immense proof that you are actually doing what they want and are not misrepresenting them. So just knowing the US medical system and the legal system, I would expect that agents are first gonna dominate the commercial space, and only then, after they've been very well vetted, would they slowly move into the medical space. Like, I would expect this to only start happening in maybe a year or more.
That's a great point, Lev. I think that there's narrow AI and then AGI, and then beyond that is whatever AI can figure out how to help the American healthcare system. But on a more
Right.
tactical note, something I would just do in terms of like agents becoming good in the next 6 months is like get a password manager. Everyone, make your passwords really good, because not all of the agents that are out there are going to be run by good people like Dan and Naman and maybe Handshake. There's also going to be very useful for adversarial folks, right? Like, it'll be quite trivial in a few months for someone to just, if you look at breaches of password databases, you can see that a surprising amount of people have passwords that are basically like password 123. Not saying that's anyone on this call, but it'll be quite trivial to just have an agent running that like goes to a website, enters an email, and then tries every common password, tries another email, tries every common password. And doing this in like a way where the attackers don't have to like individually set that up for individual sites, and can do it in ways that seem very human-like and are very hard to detect. And so just like bolstering your security, because using agents in like an adversarial way and in like in order to extract information and attack users is going to be, it's going to be like an ongoing thing that we don't have like really wonderful defenses for yet. And so, yeah, the best way to defend against that is just to like have really good passwords, which sounds like a silly small tip, but like I think will be something that a lot of people regret in the few months as these agents get better at trying to just like constantly in a low grade just like attack systems all the time.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. It'll be from Catherine, because I think this is a good question to round things off with. So Catherine is noting that generative AI is rapidly evolving, with new models being released all the time, and there is anticipation for a few more jumps forward by leading companies in the next 6 to 10 months. So how do we think this will impact agents?
I think in generally, this is actually going to be a much more positive impact for agents, where with much more advances in AI, especially Gen AI, the capabilities of agent models will actually become much more better. So the more better like the LLM models or other products become from those companies, the more better the agents will be in terms of their capabilities. So let's say now GPT-5 comes out, which is a much more powerful model than we have actually seen before. That will also improve the capabilities of agent doing planning on its own, increasing the ability of its critical thinking and whatever planning it can make. And also that way we can increase the number of tools and other things that we can directly utilize with it. So that way, I would generally think that the more it's gonna make the agent much more intelligent in terms of taking care of things you ask it to do. And there it will understand what your needs are and how to basically serve you better.
Yeah. I think the biggest impact for of these new models is that the agents will be able to do much more complex tasks. The problem with ChatGPT, like the GPT models and a lot of the existing agents, is that the GPT itself will fail and do the wrong thing in certain situations, even though the correct information was already there to present. But these models are going to get more and more reliable and more incisive in what they try and do and how. So like agents, like you'll be able to have more and more complicated agents because the models will get more and more reliable. And yeah, more and more powerful agents. Usually.
I think that in terms that I think the big difference is that I think in 6 months, agents are going to work. They work in like a limited way right now, but they fail enough that like you can't hand work off to them and kind of go away and trust that it's going to get done. You still have to kind of monitor them. And anyone who's like worked with contractors or worked with other people on your team, you know that when there's someone that only gets the work done 80% of the time, it makes it really hard to actually hand things off to them, right? Because it's like, maybe they'll get it done, maybe they don't. It like kind of feels like you're still doing the work. This will be different in 6 months. And I think that this is going to make the societal, but I think the biggest impact is actually going to be to businesses. Agents are a lot closer to doing what humans do as their job than a ChatGPT type chatbot is, or an Anthropic type chatbot is. And without a lot of like scaffolding, they get a lot closer to doing what people do on a day-to-day basis for their work. So this question of, you know, how do I hire? What do I hire for? How do I build teams? And how does that change with AI is going to become a lot more poignant. And I think does have some eventualities that are positive, but I would expect that conversation and that kind of urgency in businesses to reach kind of a fever pitch. And it's, I think, a good idea to start familiarizing yourself with the technology now, if nothing else, so that when, you know, your director, your VP, or whoever comes like barreling into the room, like, oh my God, like why do we have all these people here where I want agents instead? You at least can explain to him why that's not possible yet. But the impact on businesses and how businesses are structured is going to be a lot more profound with agentic systems in a year from now.
Okay,
and
cool.
I'll also say that just thank you to, as we're on our way out, I'll give a personal thank you to Naman and Dan for your time. Thanks so much for joining it. And thank you, Georgia, for moderating. I've really enjoyed the discussion and really hope to see everyone here in our Discord to continue talking about this. I really don't think anyone can consider themselves a real expert in AI yet. This technology has only really existed in a substantial way since maybe 2017. It's only really been like out in the world since like 2019 or 2020. So we're all learning together here and we all need to work together on how to make this not awful. And so, yeah, the Discord is one way you can do that with us.
Yeah, I just want to add, like, I've put the link to the Discord in the chat, by the way, but I just want to add about the Discord is that, like, while I was researching, like, how to make a good generative AI Discord, the only Discord channels I found were, like, frankly, horrific and, like, not very accessible. And I think what we're trying to do here is, like, make, because, like, a few of you sort of said in a roundabout way, like, oh, I hope this isn't a silly question. And I want to make a community where there is no such thing as a silly question. And, like, we have a good mixture of, like, people who are just learning and people who are, like, quite proficient with lots of different tools in that Discord. And I think the more it grows, the more it will be like a mixture of people who like are being helpful and people who need help and then all working together and cuddly, smiley, fun time. So yeah, please join the Discord. I think it'll be good. We're not like angry showboaty nerds. We're just nice, helpful people. Thanks for coming, everyone. I hope it was useful. And thank you to the speakers. And hopefully we'll catch you at the next one. We'll send a follow-up email with all the information that was in here today, including a recording of this whole thing. Thanks, everyone.
Great. See you in the future.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye.